It was the spring of 1969 in a small, dimly lit gym in Oakland. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, and the floor still carried traces of past bruises. Only 7 people were there, yet the room would never be the same again. Bruce Lee never spoke about what happened that day. But those who were there, what they saw changed how they understood him. Year, 1969. Location, Oakland, California. It was a year where Bruce Lee was in a liminal space. His reputation was no longer a whisper, it was starting to find its voice, but not everyone was ready to hear it. In the streets and gyms of Oakland, he was known as the young fighter who claimed to be better than the masters who came before him. Yet, he was still often dismissed as a curious outsider in a world governed by tradition and unquestionable respect for long-established techniques. This moment, this fight, was not just a physical contest. It was a battle over what martial arts was supposed to be. Bruce Lee was a paradox. His presence had ignited the kind of controversy only someone with his conviction could stir. A kung fu master who spoke of freedom and self-expression, Lee was criticized for not adhering to the strict codes that defined the traditional martial arts. He was too unorthodox, too revolutionary. There was something deeply unsettling about his refusal to honor the boundaries others insisted on upholding. His detractors were vocal, saying that the world of martial arts didn't need another fighter who believed in breaking the rules. They had their forms. Their methods. And then there was Lee, someone who blended styles and philosophies, someone who saw martial arts as a living, breathing practice, evolving, adapting, and learning. At the time of this challenge, Bruce Lee had already created his own martial arts philosophy, Jeet Kune Do. It wasn't just another fighting system. It was a radical rejection of the very idea that fighting could be confined to rigid movements and predictable techniques. To him, combat was not about tradition, it was about what worked. The philosophy was built on freedom, efficiency, and personal expression. And with these beliefs came a challenge. Lee's challenge wasn't to simply win, his fight was a statement. He wanted the world to see that martial arts could evolve, could be unpredictable, could be as much about thinking as it was about fighting. But the martial arts world didn't see it that way. To the purists, he was a danger to everything they believed in. His philosophy was a threat to their control, their reputation, and their understanding of what martial arts meant. Lee had to face not only the physical challenge of proving his worth but the psychological weight of being considered an outcast. His very existence as a fighter threatened the sacred order of things. This challenge in 1969 wasn't something he sought out, it came to him, from a fighter who had been watching Lee's rise with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Bruce had heard the rumors of this man, a fighter known for his own brutal methods, a man who had tested his skills in the kind of unsanctioned battles where the line between sport and street blurred. It was said that this challenger had studied many forms of combat, had been in more than one real fight where survival was the only goal. And unlike the stylized sparring matches of the day, this fighter didn't seek the recognition of tournaments or medals. His battle was with something deeper, a belief in the superiority of his approach. But it wasn't just the challenge that mattered, it was the stakes. Bruce Lee wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for something bigger than his reputation. He was fighting for the future of martial arts itself. Could this young man, who had never been formally recognized by the old guard, prove that his method, the breaking of tradition, was the way forward? Or would the challenger, grounded in the harshest realities of combat, show that tradition held an unbreakable power? In those early moments, as the challenge loomed, Bruce Lee understood something his critics failed to grasp. To win this fight, it wouldn't just be about his fists or his feet, it would be about proving his belief that martial arts, above all, should be alive. And that belief would be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Who was the man who would face Bruce Lee that day? His name was known in certain circles, but outside of those who had seen him fight, he was little more than a shadow. Unlike Bruce, this challenger didn't have the luxury of fame. He wasn't a Hollywood star or an instructor with a growing following. He wasn't looking to be the center of attention. He was there because he wanted to prove something, to himself and to the world. The challenger was a man in his early 30s, a seasoned martial artist with years of real-world experience behind him. While Bruce had spent his youth studying kung fu and philosophy, this man had honed his skills in the dark alleys of street fights and underground combat. He had trained in a mixture of martial arts styles, but he was not tied to any one tradition. His approach was raw, brutal, and unrelenting. He was known to fight with a level of aggression that could overwhelm an opponent before they ever had the chance to think. What made him dangerous was not just his physical prowess. It was his mentality. This was a man who believed in real combat, the kind where there were no rules, no holds barred. He had fought in settings where survival was everything, where the idea of honor was a distant thought compared to the urgency of victory. He believed that street fighting, the kind without the safety of referees or regulations, was where true martial artists were tested. And in a way, he saw Bruce Lee's approach as naive. Lee's philosophy, while brilliant in its blending of styles, seemed to him to lack the raw, unpolished toughness that true combat required. To the challenger, Bruce Lee's art seemed like a theory built on controlled movements, a demonstration of skill, not survival. He believed that the mind could not always outpace the body, and that in a real fight, there were no rules but the will to survive. Why did he issue the challenge? It wasn't because he disliked Bruce, but because he saw something in Lee that needed to be tested. Lee was becoming a symbol, an idea, but ideas didn't win fights, real fighting did. The challenger had trained in every kind of environment, from underground matches where money was on the line to private duels where reputation and pride were the stakes. His life was built on the concept that no matter what style a person practiced, the truth of combat could only be seen when someone was willing to push themselves to their limits. What made the challenger credible wasn't just his reputation, it was his experience. He had faced men who thought they were the best, only to watch them break under pressure. He had fought in situations where the consequences were severe. He wasn't a man who believed in playing games, and this fight, in his mind, was no different. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it wasn't an exhibition. It was a test. A test that would show the world who truly understood what combat was about. There were no illusions in the challenger's mind. He wasn't coming to be a hero or a villain. He was simply coming to fight, to show that Bruce Lee's vision could not stand in the face of reality. In his mind, it wasn't about the grand philosophies or flashy techniques. It was about what worked when the stakes were real, when the pain was real, when the fight was raw. To Bruce, the challenger was an unknown quantity, someone who might be as skilled as he was, but more than that, someone who wouldn't fight according to any set rules. He would be unpredictable, dangerous, and as raw as the combat Bruce had always hoped to avoid. The fight, Bruce knew, would be a test of more than just skill. It would be a test of philosophy. And when it came down to it, only one man's belief would survive. The gym in Oakland was far from a place where the world's most famous martial artists would gather to show off their skills. There were no cameras. No lights. No audience except for those few witnesses, who would later become the only people to know what had truly transpired that day. It was an abandoned warehouse, tucked away in a corner of the city. The paint on the walls had long since peeled, and the floor was cracked, with broken tiles and scuff marks telling the story of countless battles fought over years. The dim lighting barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. The air was thick with a mixture of sweat and old, musty wood, as though the room itself had absorbed the violence of every fight that had taken place within it. This wasn't a place for spectacle, it was a place for real fights. There were no referees to call fouls, no regulations to fall back on. The rules were as simple as they were brutal: survive. In the world Bruce Lee had navigated, combat was often more than just a demonstration of skill, it was an act of survival. But here, in this private gym, there was no room for showmanship. Every move was critical. Every strike could determine the outcome of the fight, not just for the man in front of you, but for your own sense of identity. Witnesses remember that the tension in the room was palpable. Even those who had seen street fights, had witnessed unsanctioned battles between fighters, could sense something different that day. There was no theatrical build-up. No hype. Just a slow realization among the small group of onlookers that what was about to happen was not just a fight, it was a clash of philosophies. Bruce Lee's unorthodox methods, born from years of intense study and personal conviction, were about to be tested by a man who believed that combat was pure, stripped of all the theories and ideology that Bruce had embraced. Bruce's challenger stood across from him, a stone-faced figure who showed no sign of fear or hesitation. He wasn't there to be a spectator. He wasn't there for anything other than to make sure his perspective on combat was understood. Lee could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on him. This was not a friendly sparring session. It was a contest of survival, where the stakes were higher than just a trophy or reputation. The witnesses were there for one reason: they believed in the significance of the fight. They weren't fighters themselves, but they had seen enough of the world to know that this wasn't just a match, it was a historical moment. The kind of fight where no matter who walked away, both men would change in ways that couldn't be undone. The emotional atmosphere was a mixture of curiosity and unease. The kind of silence that clung to the air before a storm. The tension wasn't just physical. It was in the way each man stood, in the way the challenger's eyes never wavered from Bruce, and in the way Bruce, calm yet clearly focused, measured every movement of his opponent. It was as if the world outside that gym had disappeared, leaving only the two men and their beliefs. Their actions would speak louder than anything they could say to each other. This was Bruce Lee's world, his philosophy, his practice. But in this small gym, his world would be tested in the most unforgiving way possible. The rules had been set in silence. It wasn't about who had the better technique, it was about who could survive in the raw, unrelenting world of real combat. And when the bell rang, signaling the beginning of the challenge, there was no turning back. The air inside the gym was thick with tension as the two men faced off. The challenger stood firm, his body solid, grounded, with a stance that was both natural and menacing. Bruce Lee, agile and calm, was prepared to use every advantage he had: speed, precision, and the mental clarity that came from years of training. He was used to opponents underestimating him. He was used to proving them wrong. But this wasn't just about skill, this was about survival. The first exchange happened almost too quickly to process. Bruce's footwork was precise, his body language fluid. He moved like water, swift, calculating, always just out of reach. He feinted with a jab, testing his opponent's defenses, before throwing a sidekick aimed at the challenger's midsection. The challenger, however, was ready. The kick landed, but not with the full force Bruce had expected. The challenger's forearm absorbed most of it, and in one fluid motion, he countered. A low kick from the challenger slammed into Bruce's thigh. The pain was immediate, deep and sharp, but it was something Bruce had prepared for. He grimaced but didn't flinch. The room felt even smaller now as the space between the two men began to narrow. There was no room for mistakes. Every movement was a calculation, every strike a response to the other's intentions. Bruce's speed was undeniable, but the challenger's power was relentless. The two men circled each other, both waiting for the other to make the next move. It was a game of cat and mouse, a fight where the rules were not of form, but of survival. Bruce launched into another series of strikes: jab, cross, hook, his hands moving like lightning. The challenger blocked and absorbed them with a deliberate calmness that seemed unnerving. His posture was perfect, his defense impenetrable. Then, it happened. The challenger's knee shot up, a brutal attack that connected with Bruce's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Bruce staggered back, his lungs burning. He hadn't expected the hit to come from such a short distance. For a brief moment, it seemed like Bruce was at a disadvantage. The challenger's raw power and willingness to strike with overwhelming force put Bruce on the back foot. Lee's movements, though lightning fast, lacked the same brute force. He was known for his ability to outmaneuver, outthink, outlast, but now, the ground beneath his feet felt uncertain. The challenger wasn't making mistakes. He wasn't overextending or falling into Bruce's traps. But Bruce was no novice. He had fought too many battles, faced too many challenges to be easily rattled. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This wasn't just about speed. This wasn't just about power. It was about keeping his mind sharp, his focus unwavering. The pain was real, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to adjust, to evolve in the middle of the fight. As the challenger closed in again, Bruce knew it was time to change the pace. He adjusted his stance, shifting slightly. He'd given up some ground, but now he had the chance to control the rhythm. He used his smaller frame to his advantage, slipping past a heavy right hand and stepping in close. Bruce's movements were quick, precise, his footwork a blur as he closed the gap. In one fluid motion, he threw a devastating hook, aiming at the challenger's temple. It was clear now that this wasn't just a contest of skill. The physical battle between them was visceral, raw. Bruce was fighting to prove a philosophy, to show that his approach to martial arts, his belief in freedom, fluidity, and adaptability, could withstand the brutality of reality. The challenger, on the other hand, was testing something else. He wasn't just testing Lee's skill, he was testing his resolve. His belief was that combat couldn't be controlled or danced around, it had to be conquered. But the fight was far from over. As the two men locked eyes once again, the room seemed to shrink further. Bruce knew this moment would change everything. Whether he won or lost didn't matter. What mattered was how he responded to the danger before him. The first exchange had set the stage. It was now about who could push further, who could endure longer, who could bend without breaking. The fight had already crossed a line. What had begun as a test of speed and technique had escalated into a brutal exchange. Bruce's chest burned with every breath, the sharp sting of the knee to his ribs still echoing in his body. His movements were becoming slightly more sluggish, though his focus remained laser-sharp. The pain was more than physical now, it was psychological. The weight of the challenge had pressed on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The challenger, by contrast, seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. His movements were relentless, and his strikes didn't just land, they punished. Bruce felt the bruises forming, the soreness creeping up his limbs, yet he knew he couldn't slow down. The challenger's strategy was clear now, he was testing Bruce's limits, pushing him further than he'd ever been pushed. But Bruce, with his background in philosophy and his deep belief in the adaptability of the body and mind, refused to back down. The room had grown quieter, save for the sound of their bodies colliding, the thud of a punch to the ribs, the crack of a low kick connecting with Bruce's shin. Each hit was a reminder of how far beyond the realm of controlled sparring they had ventured. This was real. There were no rehearsed routines, no safety net of padded mats or rules to protect them. Each strike, each movement could be the one that determined the outcome. Bruce's mind, usually so precise and clear, was clouded now with the pressure of survival. As he stepped back to regain his footing, a small part of him wondered if this would be the fight where his philosophy failed him. His side ached. His vision blurred slightly. And yet, it wasn't fear that gripped him, it was uncertainty. Could he still control this fight, or was it too late to reel in the storm that had begun? The challenger closed in again, his expression unreadable. His fists were like hammers, swinging with brutal efficiency. Bruce dodged a wild right hook, narrowly avoiding the strike that would have knocked him off balance. His feet shuffled, every movement precise, but the attacker was relentless, matching him step for step. There was no room to breathe. No space for recovery. Bruce could feel his control slipping, each blow reminding him that his own belief in fluidity and adaptability was being tested in the most dangerous way possible. And then it happened. Bruce blocked a strike but felt the full force of the challenger's left hand crash into his jaw. The impact sent a sharp pain through his skull. His vision swam for a brief moment. He could feel the blood taste in his mouth before he swallowed it, the rawness of the moment, and then, in an instant, his mind cleared. His body burned. He was fighting not just to win, but to stay in control of himself. This wasn't about fighting another man anymore, it was about fighting the very limits of his own philosophy. Lee had always believed in the concept of self-control, of mastering his own body to the point where his opponent was irrelevant. But now, with the challenger's power pressing in on him, he had to ask himself, how much control could he retain in this chaos? How far was he willing to push before it became something he couldn't pull back from? For a fleeting second, he hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, his opponent struck again. This time, the hit was a clean jab to the face. Bruce staggered back, fighting to maintain his balance. His body screamed at him to stop. To recover. To think. But there was no time. The challenger, sensing blood, moved in for the kill. His face was grim, determined. This was the moment Bruce knew he had to decide, was he going to go full force and meet the challenger with equal violence, or would he stay true to his belief in control, in the calm, calculated response? Bruce wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing. The pain was overwhelming, but there was no retreat. This was not just a fight for dominance, it was a moral decision. The challenger's next strike came with brutal force, but this time, Bruce was ready. His footwork shifted. He sidestepped the punch and countered with a precise right cross to the challenger's jaw. The blow wasn't powerful enough to end the fight, but it was enough to shift the momentum. For a moment, there was silence. The sound of their breaths, ragged and strained, filled the room. Bruce's body was battered. His jaw ached. His vision swam. But as he stood there, staring into the eyes of his opponent, he realized the fight was no longer about proving his superiority, it was about proving his ability to endure, to adapt, and to find the line between violence and control. And with that realization came a shift in his approach. Bruce had always known that true mastery wasn't about overwhelming force, it was about knowing when to act, and when not to act. The gym was still, almost unnaturally so, after the final exchange. The heavy breaths of the two men seemed to echo through the empty space. Bruce Lee stood in front of his challenger, sweat pouring down his face, his body aching from the bruises, the impact of each blow that had landed. His opponent, too, was battered but not broken. The fight had taken its toll on both men, but neither had given up. Neither had yielded. In that moment, it was clear that Bruce had passed through something more than just a physical test. His body had been pushed to the limit, but his mind had been the true battlefield. The moral decision he'd made, to fight with control, to not unleash his full power, to remain true to his philosophy, had shaped the fight in ways that could not be measured by simple strikes or victories. The challenger, his face bloodied, had stopped advancing. His hands were still clenched in fists, but his body language had changed. The initial brutality that had defined his approach had softened, if only for a moment. Bruce had pushed back, not just with his fists, but with the force of his belief in his method. The challenger could see it now, Bruce Lee was not just a skilled fighter, he was a man who understood the fight itself in a way that transcended mere technique. But the fight was over. The challenger took a step back, his breath ragged, eyes narrowing as he assessed Bruce. No words were exchanged. There was no grand handshake, no mutual respect offered in the traditional sense. The challenger had come to destroy Lee's philosophy, to prove that brute force would always prevail over theory. But now, after the battle, something had shifted. Bruce had proven that control, adaptability, and the balance of body and mind could overcome sheer power. The witnesses, those who had watched in silence, who had held their breath as each blow landed, remembered the aftermath with a mix of awe and silence. They spoke little of the specifics of the fight in the days that followed, but they remembered the way the gym felt afterward. There was a weight in the room, like something had been broken but not fully healed. For Bruce, the physical scars from the fight would fade, but the emotional and psychological impact would stay with him. He had faced his greatest fear, not that he would lose to the challenger, but that he would lose control of his own philosophy. That, in a moment of desperation, he might become something he didn't want to be. Bruce Lee didn't speak much about that fight, at least not publicly. He never boasted about his victory or justified the decisions he'd made. He didn't need to. What happened in that gym, what the few witnesses had seen, spoke for itself. The fight hadn't been about domination. It had been about survival, and in survival, there was no room for fantasy. There was only reality. And reality, in this case, had been more brutal than anyone expected. The legacy of that fight, its physical consequences, its psychological weight, shaped Bruce Lee in ways that couldn't be seen in the following years. He would go on to refine Jeet Kune Do further, to evolve and adapt his ideas about martial arts and combat. But he also grew quieter, more introspective. He understood the costs of violence in a way that few could comprehend. He wasn't afraid of his own power. But he understood that true strength lay in knowing when to hold it back. The challenger, too, left the gym that day with something changed inside him. His belief in brute force, in the supremacy of raw combat, had been challenged. He would never again see martial arts the same way. The result of the fight didn't matter. What mattered was the realization that power, when unchecked, could destroy as much as it could create. In the end, Bruce Lee's legacy wasn't about the fight itself. It was about the way he faced it. The strongest man in the room, after all, is not the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly how much damage he chose not to do.